Welcome to the Leadership for Society speaker series. This year's theme is tensions, business, civic society, and politics. And today I'm talking to General H.R. McMaster, the Found and Michelle Ajami Senior Fellow at Hoover Institution, and the 25th United States National Security Advisor. Thanks for being here, HR.
Hey, Brian, great to be with you.
Great. So I'm just going to jump right in. I'm curious about your time as the National Security Advisor. What do you see as the biggest shifts in the landscape of foreign policy and national security, particularly as they relate to, say, technological advancement?
Yeah. Hey, Brian, I think the biggest shift has been the competition with China. In March of 2017, you might remember that Trump was about to meet with Xi Jinping in Mar-a-Lago the first week in April. So I convened what we called a principal small group framing session, a mouthful of words there. But what we're trying to do was to take more time thinking about the nature of the challenges that we're facing and apply design thinking to those challenges. So we provided like a 5-page paper about the nature of the competition with China. And then what we were really trying to do was to make the implicit assumptions that often underpin policies and strategies explicit and test them. And so I brought to that meeting the Obama administration strategy toward China. It could have been the George W. Bush administration policy toward China as well, or the Bill Clinton policy. And I read an excerpt from it to highlight really the fundamental assumption that had underpinned our approach to China, and that was the assumption that China, having been welcomed in to the international economic order in particular, would play by the rules, and as China prospered, it would liberalize its economy and liberalize its form of governance. By 2017, it was clear that was not the case. So I noted after reading that passage, I said, we're about to affect the biggest shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, from cooperation and engagement with China to what we're calling transparent competition, and in recognition that China was engaged in a range of aggressive behaviors, some of them military or paramilitary in the South China Sea or vis-a-vis Taiwan or vis-a-vis the Senkaku Islands, but had been engaged in really a sophisticated campaign of economic aggression against us, in which it had weaponized its statist mercantilist economic model to gain a differential advantage over the United States, and as well as to really extend and tighten the party's grip on power internally. And to challenge, the international order, tear the old international order down and replace it with a new one that was more sympathetic to the CCP's interests, the Chinese Communist Party's interests. So I think, Brian, that was the biggest shift. And actually, it's an element of continuity between the Trump and Biden administration. At least there's one, I mean, and I think it's going to stick with us just because I think what we're able to do is educate people about the nature of that threat.
So that's an interesting one because it seems to me that a lot of major U.S. corporations have seen, and I don't know if they continue to see, but have seen China as a really big and desirable market to be in. And so I'm curious the tensions you see between business interests and kind of the national security concerns you're just expressing.
Well, there were big tensions at first, 2017, 18, 19. I mean, people just didn't want to believe it, right? I mean, people were in denial about the nature of the competition. But I think, I wanted to send flowers and a box of chocolates to Xi Jinping because he really just kind of clarified, the nature of the competition with the party's increasingly aggressive actions, especially after COVID, but obviously before that. And what I would have, Brian, is senior business leaders from some of our biggest corporations would come to me when I was national security advisor and say, "Hey, let me tell you, how how we're being treated by China and how difficult it is, and the degree to which we have to continuously fight against a sustained campaign of industrial espionage, the subsidization of Chinese competitor companies that then lead the CCP to shut you out of their domestic market and then produce whatever you're producing at artificially low prices, dump them on the international market and drive you out of business." So I would get all these complaints, and then they would say, "Hey, but don't tell anybody I told you this," because they were afraid of getting completely shut out by the Chinese market or coerced by the Chinese Communist Party. And so this is when I wrote the book Battlegrounds. I tried to just use a simple formula for understanding the Chinese Communist Party strategy. It's the 3 C's: co-option, coercion, and concealment. Co-opt you with what sounds like a great deal, at least in the area of maybe short-term profits for some of these joint ventures and the associated access to their market. But hey, once you're in, they coerce you. They coerce you adhere to their to their policies and to certainly to even provide cover for them or not complain about some of their most egregious behavior, whether it's slave labor or concentration camps for the Uyghurs in Xinjiang.
Mhm.
And then they conceal this as, oh, this is just like normal business practices. Hey, well, it's not. I mean, ask Bain, ask any of these companies, that have been coerced lately. So, what I would tell people is get the hell out if you can, if you're investing, because you're going to have stranded capital there. I mean, in fact, if you try to get out now, you probably can't, which is probably an indicator of why you should get the heck out if you're investing and look for other opportunities to get you solid returns. And then also, I would just say that we have become overly dependent on single points of failure associated with, I think, this artificiality of the concentration of so much of the world's manufacturing on the southeast coast of China.
Mhm.
And of course, we should have learned this from Russia, right? It's a really bad idea, Brian, to give a hostile authoritarian regime coercive power over your economy. I mean, that's what Germany had done, and Europe more broadly, in the form of Russian natural gas exports. So let's not do that. We already have done it, right?
Mhm.
So we're behind already in improving the resilience of our supply chains and getting away from these single points of failure. And for those who are skeptical about any kind of form of mitigating this risk, I would just say that it's really important to understand that it's the CCP that's driving a lot of this decoupling, right? And
Mhm.
and this is under the Made in China 2025 policy, and then this Xi Jinping's, I think, forlorn pursuit of a dual circulation economy in which he can maintain coercive power, over us, while insulating China from any kind of economic or financial consequences for the CCP's or the PLA's, the People's Liberation Army's aggression.
Mhm. So, I mean, what you're describing, I don't, let me make sure I have it right. It sounds like you're suggesting an isolation kind of approach where we pull back from our engagement with China. And then also, I assume you'd want our allies to do some of the same. And I wonder what that means in terms of the investment we currently have in terms of
Yeah.
technological advance. Like, there people come over here and study sometimes and contribute, or the access to the markets. Like, what are the consequences, do you think, of this decoupling, or at least it sounds like pulling back and maybe having a strategy of more isolating China?
Yeah. I would call it de-risking, right? Because I don't think anybody now, denies that the risk is there, but I wouldn't call it isolating, right? I mean, I think it's important to understand that at this stage, we should be trying to maximize positive contact with as many Chinese people and as many Chinese entities, including business entities and financial entities, as we can, if they are not acting as an arm of the Chinese Communist Party and acting against us. But Brian, what's sad about it, and I think anybody who's on this, joining us today. I mean, they're living this. That
Mhm.
space is getting shut down by the Chinese Communist Party, right?
Mhm.
So if you're doing business with China, if you're engaged with Chinese entities, you've got a high level of risk, right? You've got U.S. regulatory risk because you're seeing some of the tools of economic statecraft being applied here in terms of restrictions on Chinese investment in the United States under the FIRMA Act and under the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, especially scrutinizing these investments that have been aimed for many years at extracting sensitive technology
Mhm.
and intellectual property, right, from U.S. Companies or research organizations. But then also, you've seen now the at least the beginning, just the very beginning of scrutinizing some of the outbound investment in Chinese companies. And this is important, Brian, because U.S. smart money has been funding the People's Liberation Army's development of capabilities. I mean, two
Mhm.
U.S. venture firms invested a lot of money in 2014 in a company called Four Paradigm. Guess what they do? They do all the battlefield artificial intelligence for the People's Liberation Army. So I just happen to think it's a bad idea for us to invest in companies that are developing weapons and military capabilities that could be used against our children and grandchildren, and so I think of it, Brian, in terms of a Hippocratic oath.
Mhm.
If you're in a boardroom, if you're in a C-suite, hey, do no hurt or harm with relations with China and engagement with China in three areas. First, don't help them develop a differential technological advantage that has military application. Hey, second, Don't help them perfect their technologically enabled Orwellian police state or commit crimes against humanity. I mean, I'm sure people got a lot of good returns on Hikvision, and on Sense Time. But hey, those are tools of genocide and repression, you know? Congratulations. And then
Mhm.
third, third I would say is don't jeopardize the long-term viability of your company in exchange for short-term, returns associated with these relationships with Chinese entities or Chinese investment or promises of access to the market because they don't pan out. I
Mm.
mean, look at those who did joint ventures in wind turbines or solar panels or batteries or the list just goes on. How about fifth generation communications hardware? This is of course, the Huawei case of stolen technology from Cisco and others,
Mhm.
massive subsidization, at least $60 billion, into Huawei, and then driving everybody out of the market except for Nokia and Ericsson, are the two who are left standing. So hey, what are we going to learn from this, Brian? It's just what's this quote attributed by Einstein? I don't know if it's true or not. That the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
Mhm. So, you mentioned that we should engage with Chinese people and Chinese corporations as long as they're not an arm of the Chinese government. How do
Mhm.
you know? How are people to know? Because it's
Well,
not. You're also suggesting that it's disguised.
Well, so here, this is really, I think, where the private sector's got to come in, man. I mean, first of all, the FBI, that's their job, right? I
Mm.
don't think it's a university president's or a provost's job to screen students or any of that stuff. But I think if you are in a sensitive research, organization or facility, you've got to do just due diligence. I mean, is this person a PLA scientist? You know what I mean? I mean, what universities do they come from? And there are firms now that can help you with this, and they do it in a very tactful manner. They work with HR departments, they work with, your general counsel, right? And they'll help you minimize risk to your business, minimize risk to your university's research activity, right? Or maybe we've had PLA scientists in Department of Defense and Department of Energy funded research. That's crazy, So I think there's just an element of due diligence there that you should expect. But also, I think we should have more Chinese students in our universities. But once they're there, we have to protect them because what's really important, Brian, is that the MSS, the Ministry of State Security, and this front organization of the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, you know what they do? They monitor our students. They're monitoring our students at Stanford right now, and so Chinese students feel this pressure that hey, if they say anything that could be construed as negative about the Chinese Communist Party, guess what? Their parents get a knock on the door back at home.
Mm.
So I think that's a layup, for any college president or provost to say our university will not tolerate the intimidation of our students. And then the second thing, Brian, we could do is we should make sure they have the best possible experience here in the United States. They get a real great university experience where they meet people like we have at Stanford from all over the world. In some universities, not ours, but I think other universities, they're Chinese dorms, they're Chinese dining facilities because this is a moneymaker. They pay full tuition. I mean,
Mhm.
hey, let's make sure they get the best experience. So I think this is a struggle, Brian, because the party's shutting a lot of this down in terms of
Mhm.
positive interaction. We should be on the opposite side of that,
Mm.
trying to maximize these positive interactions. And I think what else we could do, Brian, and this is we got some of the best minds in U.S. business, I'm sure, tuning in here. How about figuring out a way around the Chinese firewall? You know, how about reaching the Chinese people directly, just
Mhm.
with a different source of information than the steady diet of propaganda they get, from the CCP, right? I mean,
Mhm.
every Chinese news broadcast, 15 minutes of how great Xi Jinping is, 15 minutes for how all the great accomplishments of the party, and then 15 minutes of how decadent and corrupt and horrible, the United States and the West is, and how we're all determined to keep China down. I mean,
Mhm.
so how about just figuring out an alternative to get a way to get around that firewall instead
Mhm.
of what some of our businesses have done, and I won't name them, but we know who they are, who've actually helped China perfect their their search engines and their firewall. Let's not do that.
So, it sounds like you're suggesting some kind of increased cooperation between government and the private sector or academia in terms of figuring out how do we get Chinese students or Chinese corporations that are good actors into our system and engaged and keep out the security apparatus that's problematic. How should we think about that cooperation between government and private industry? Like, should private industry be concerned the government is going to come in
Yeah.
and overreach and overstep? Should academia be concerned that now we have to worry that the students are being background checked by the FBI? Like, how do you think about that connection between the government and the private sector?
Hey, I think the cooperation's getting much better. I think the trust is building back up. Remember, I mean, I first arrived out here in Silicon Valley as, for my second career, in 2018, only the second job I've had in my life, and if you or third if you count McDonald's, where I was employee of the month, I want to point out, but but uh, but when I got here, it was still in the post Snowden kind of hangover here. You know what I mean? It was the Google walkout. It was like, hey, again, flowers and chocolates to Xi Jinping and probably Vladimir Putin too with the invasion of Ukraine. I think there's been a real recognition, that we're under threat by these authoritarian, hostile powers, and we've got to do something about it. Let's at least, not underwrite our own demise,
Mhm.
or be complacent in a way that jeopardizes our national security, or the competitiveness of our company. So I think that cooperation is increasing. There are limitations of what the government can do, right? I mean, the FBI a lot of times will come in and go, "Hey, you've got a problem. We can't tell you what it is, but you've got a problem." So because it's an investigation, right? So I think these private sector solutions, just as everybody knows, you have to harden your enterprise, right, against cyber espionage, against other forms of espionage, and you need this kind of active layered defense. You need the automated tools that for anomaly detection. You put into place like right of least privilege. All sorts of ways to protect your company. But there's a personnel dimension to this as well. And it doesn't have to be draconian or anything like that. But it's just due diligence. I mean, if you look at some of the biggest breaches that have occurred, whether it's in cloud computing or whatever. I mean, those have been from insider threats of various types. Some of the biggest breaches in the United States government, like this Massachusetts guardsman, for example,
Yeah.
or these. So insider threats is, I mean, I think it's just fulfilling your responsibilities as a corporate leader or a board member to ensure you have those kind of mechanisms in place. And of course, nothing's foolproof. Brian, what we know about the CCP, is if the door's open, the front door's open, they're going to walk right in to the front door.
Mhm.
You bolt the door, they're going to come in through the window. You put bars on the window, they're going to tunnel into your basement. So it's like never, it's never over. It's never over. You just got to keep active, and you've got to have a really, really good and competent, information security, but broad security effort. And it's your OT, it's your IT, it's your supply chain. I mean, third party risk we know is huge. So, you know, I mean, I think everybody recognizes now you've got to put more assets into this area of your business
Mm.
because it could be catastrophic, right? If you're compromised.
Yeah. So, I love the metaphor, right? If you like leave open the front door, they're walking in the front. If they can't get
Right.
in the front, the back, the window, tunneling in. Because the other side of that is you're constantly hardening the target, but you're also the risk is that you're also making your own house a less pleasant place to live in, right? In
Well,
terms
well,
of,
that's a balance. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Brian. So
and,
I mean, you have to do what's sensible. I think what's
Mhm.
sensible, right? So if you put into measures in place that improve your cybersecurity, but nobody can log onto your system, or share information, right? It's like the old. I don't know if you saw the old Maxwell Smart, episode, "The Cone of Silence." The Cone of Silence.
I
And
think
they
yes,
can't
is
talk
I
to each
think I
other.
I think a lot of our audience might be too young for that, but yes, yes.
You should put a clip in post production, man. Put a clip into that. So I think you just got to do it sensible, and you got to involve all your employees in it. Everybody's got to own it, and a lot of it's education and also I think this is an area where you could have collaboration across industries, right? I mean, this is an area where you're not going to divulge any competitive secrets, with your competitors, but I think within within certain markets, the big companies should be sharing information, sharing best practices. I think that's actually happening from the companies that I interact with here. And we all got to help each other with this problem.
And then what's the role for international cooperation? Like what would you suggest we should be doing with our allies or other people in the global sphere
Yeah.
outside of China or to address some of these concerns?
Well, it's absolutely has to be done in a multinational format. This is it being, insulating ourselves or protecting ourselves from the weaponization of Chinese mercantilist status model and their various forms of economic aggression, right? And I think the Biden administration gets high marks for this. I mean, we saw this. We saw the application of a broad range of tools of economic statecraft, if you will, applied by the Biden administration. It's notable that they kept in place, the Trump administration tariffs, that were in place because of unfair trade and economic practices and unfair competitive advantages associated with state subsidization or intellectual property theft and so forth, or overproduction, overcapacity, and dumping in the case of steel and aluminum and so forth. So those were kept in place. But in addition, you saw the export controls put into place associated with the hardware necessary for microprocessor chip manufacturing. That was done in a cooperative manner, in a multinational manner, because you have to do it that way. Because
Mm,
otherwise, what China will do is they will just say, okay, we'll just buy from somebody else. So I think all of this has to be done in a multinational format, and I think with a priority on European countries, EU and the UK and Japan, because I think when those three big markets work together, I mean, we're kind of unstoppable, and we can prevent China from rewriting the rules in their favor, and we can employ a sensible approach, across. As I mentioned, inbound investment screening, outbound investment screening, export controls, but also, some key, I think, subsidization or incentives, tax incentives, other incentives, to help us get back into the markets that we vacated. You know, whether it's battery manufacturing and the upstream components and minerals and mineral separation associated with battery manufacturing, or some of these other critical sectors that we just kind of vacated. And it's going to take time to get back in the game on it. And we see this with chips, right? That's the Chips Act and the
mhm,
and the the what's happening in Phoenix and in Texas and New York and other places where we're realizing, hey man, it was a bad idea to separate design and manufacturing in
mhm,
chips. And so I think that applies to a lot of other sectors. And of course, one of the arguments is, well, it takes time. Well, it takes even longer if we never start. So
yeah,
I think, and this isn't all onshoring. This isn't. This is friend shoring, as Secretary Yellen has said. I like that term, but it really just gets to the idea that supply chains. And I think everybody recognizes this. I mean, it's been in The Economist. Everybody, this is like the Geico commercial. Everybody knows that supply chains have become too biased in favor of efficiency over resilience.
mhm. I was going to ask about that. Like, if you think about private industry, let's say their primary interest is in returns to the shareholders. That's how things are set up in this country. The primary interest is not national security, is not resilience of, broadly speaking, resilience of supply chains.
Yeah.
And so, how do you address that? So, do you think the government should come in and create incentives to create more resilient supply chains to prevent kind of the easy entry into markets that are potentially problematic? I mean, is that the government's role then to
Yeah.
regulate or create incentives to change behavior?
The government certainly has a role, I think, in exposing some of the risks. And I would say these risks fall into, regulatory risk on the US side, because you see the blacklist of Chinese companies growing and growing for a number of reasons.
Mm,
One of those reasons is their continued support for Russia's war making machine and the provision of the electronics and other hardware components that are allowing Russia to continue their onslaught against Ukrainian people and Ukrainian infrastructure. So, I think government has a role in that, for example, of alerting, to investors and others about the risks. But also, I think just in China, it's the fundamental lack of transparency, right? I mean, they crack down on Bain and everybody else. And
Mhm.
then, our dumb money flows into that country are in many ways the scaffolding that's been holding up their statist economic model. I mean,
Mhm.
we got to stop that, I think. You saw what they do to manipulate their own markets. The lack of transparency is one way. But also, like, you don't really know what a lot of these companies do and their connections to the government. So the risk is regulatory, but it's also reputational. I mean, I think maybe genocide should be an ESG issue. I don't know what you think, man, but I think hell yeah, it should be, right. And so if who would have thought the textile company, sector would be controversial? Well, it is now when you're using slave labor.
Mhm.
Or look at the continued exposure of problematic supply chains for car parts, for example, that go back to forced labor issues in Xinjiang, and just in recent weeks. So, hey, I just think that the risk is high,
Mhm.
and I'm not an economist. Again, I'm a washed up general, man. But when I look, when I struggled, I got to tell you, I struggled in my international econ class as a cadet at West Point. I mean, our instructor, a guy named Colonel Golden, he would
Mhm.
start on one chart classroom, and like board 3, I was lost, so I'm not.
You did all
So
right, though.
don't trust me on any of this stuff.
It worked out all right. It worked out all right for you, though.
But the whole thing, the whole Chinese economy looks like a Ponzi scheme to me, man. And it
Mhm.
looks like they're going to run out of a runway on this thing. Of course, everybody has been tracking the debt crisis, the crisis in real estate.
Mhm.
But look at what the party's doing in response, right? I mean, they're covering stuff up, right? They're trying to reduce the degree of transparency. When they had high, youth unemployment and underemployment numbers, they just stopped reporting the numbers for a while and then came up with a new way of report. I mean, so I just think don't be a chump with your investments. Realize that it's high risk. It's
Mhm.
high risk on the Chinese side from a regulatory perspective too. Look at what they did to the tech sector, right? Look
Mhm.
at what they did to the private education sector. Look what they're about to do in the healthcare sector. So if you're investing in China, I mean, I think it's super high risk. You ought to look for returns elsewhere, and in particular, maybe look for returns in areas that where your investment can make a difference in improving supply chain resilience, reducing the reliance on China.
Mhm. And as you look forward, so let's assume that the things people take you up on this approach to China, and we deal well with kind of the threats that China poses right now. From your perspective, like what do you see next as you look past that? What are the
Yeah.
things that you think about in terms of policy and national security, and especially in technology, as you think about the development of technology?
Well. So I think we talk a lot about like kind of defensive mechanisms, of export controls and screening of investments inbound and outbound and everything else.
Mhm.
But hey, a lot of it is like, what can we do? You got to forgive me here. I'm a military guy. What can we do to be offensive here? To strengthen our own competitive advantages. I think investments, right? Obviously, in critical technologies is a huge part of that, and we have to recognize that those investments are happening mainly in the private sector. And so I think mobilizing US capital and using America's unchecked entrepreneurialism, to maintain our advantages. We know the state is not the best allocator of resources, right? So we don't want to replicate the Chinese model. We want to unleash our competitive advantages. And then the other big opportunity, Brian, it's immigration, man. I mean, I don't know why. Well, every engineering student who graduates, in the United States should get an H-1B visa stapled to their diploma. Why don't we
Mhm.
do that? So many of our students, right, who are just brilliant. I mean, they wind up going to Canada to get a visa. Are you kidding me? So, nobody's trying to immigrate to China, right? I mean, that's our advantage is
Mhm.
in human capital. And so let's get after that. I mean, I really think that, there are other kind of visas we could use as well, but I really think this is our greatest competitive advantage and greatest untapped resource. Is really immigration reform, but also just the granting of visas to those who are educated in our system or have a desire to live in the United States and maybe become U.S. citizens. I mean, I think back, Brian, to like Tiananmen Square, 1989, right? George H.W. Bush is the president. He said, hey, if you're a Chinese student studying in the United States, you get to stay. You get a green card. And you know what? I mean, the numbers of Chinese students, obviously, at that period of time were very small compared to today. But 60,000 Chinese students took him up on that. And you know what they became? Some of our most successful entrepreneurs and engineers and businessmen, and women. So, I think we have some competitive advantages that we are not using, or we're not using adequately.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And, this has been really interesting. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about these issues. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Brian, great to be with you. Look forward to seeing you on campus.
Yeah, you too, HR. Great. Forward to seeing you.